From Boston, Crockett's Victory Garden.
Welcome to Crockett's Victory Garden. I'm Jim Crockett, and although this is still summertime, chrysanthemum season is soon to be with us. This is one of those chrysanthemum plants which I started this spring just from a single cutting about 3 inches long. We're going to put this in the perennial garden. But before I do that, I'll tell you some of the other things we're going to do today. I'm going to show you how to save some money by sowing seeds of both vegetables and flowers, which will come into bearing in the fall or in the winter or even next summer. And then I have another idea to help you keep the raccoons out of your corn patch. But first of all, let's just look at this chrysanthemum plant for a moment. And here it is. You can see it's a plant something over a foot tall. Many stems on it, probably 25 or 30 stems on the plant. This one was started from a single division or a cutting, roughly 3 inches tall this spring. You saw me pinch it back once and pinch it back again. Now this plant is just at the stage of forming flower buds. Well, what I'm going to do is to put this over in the perennial garden where the foxglove came from. Now the foxglove is a biennial, and last year at this time, this plant, the seeds of this plant were sown just as fine as dust. The plants grew all winter long, all fall long, and lived over winter covered with some pine needles. Then this spring it sent up its flowering spike, roughly 4 or 5 feet tall. This, by the way, are the secondary blossoms. You might like to see what those flowers look like. But this is a biennial. Its life cycle is to grow 1 year, blossom the next year, and then die. So I'm going to give this plant a kind burial in my compost pile. And where it came from, over here in the perennial garden, I'm going to put in the chrysanthemum, which will give us flowers way along into October this fall. Right down in here, we'll put this in, push some soil around that, give that a drink of water, and that plant will never know it's been moved. This is one of the nice things about the chrysanthemums. But with chrysanthemums, you must, for best results, start with just a tiny plant or a tiny cutting every year. You can't get good results if you allow the clumps to go year after year. They use up the nourishment in the soil and just don't amount to a whole lot. Well, let's go from here. We'll talk about another type of flower. And you can see along on both sides of my path here, we have some rather nice sweet alyssum. Well, between the sweet alyssum plants, through the early part of the summer, we've raised 2 crops of lettuce. There was a bright red ruby lettuce and some green bib lettuce. But now I'm going to switch the pattern and have some flowers mixed with flowers. I want to show you this particular one. This is called a nugget marigold. It's a cross between the so-called African marigold and the French marigold, both of which, by the way, are native to Mexico, which is a little bit confusing. But this cross results in a plant which is sterile, unable to make seeds of its own. It keeps trying to make seeds, will blossom and blossom and blossom right up until the coldest part of the fall. So we'll have this combination of orange and lavender right down the central path. Now all we do here, just make a little hole with a trowel, set these fellows right in like that, give these a drink of water. In a week's time, they'll be nearly double that size, and we'll have totally about a foot across all throughout the fall. Then down here, let's look at the beans. This is a variety of bean called tender crop. And you can see the beans on here ready to be picked. I should say that we had another variety of bean in here earlier this summer in this very same spot, one with yellow pods on it called gold crop. Again, pick your beans while they're tender. These beans used to be called string beans, but there aren't any strings on these beans nowadays. These are so tender. This is tender crop, a good variety. It's not too late to plant them. So I'm going to plant some right across here where we had another crop of beets and carrots came out of this row. I'm going to plant some beans now which will be ready for harvesting in September. And in this instance, I'm going to plant the variety which is called the Bush Romano. Now, this is an Italian bean. You perhaps know of it as a pole bean, but now there is a bush form. I like it because it grows quickly, produces, and you don't have to fool around with the plants, because some of the beans later on in the season get rather straggly looking when we get a spell of rainy weather. The seeds themselves from the seedsman have been treated with Captan, and so this is to keep them from decaying when they're in the soil. What I'm going to do now is to moisten some of these seeds. Put them in and put just a little water with them to moisten them, because I want to coat those seeds with a legume inoculant. If you've watched this program before, you've seen this black powder that I sprinkle on the bean seeds and on the peas. This is a bacteria. It enables the legumes to extract nitrogen, free nitrogen, right out of the atmosphere. So having coated the seeds, we'll plant them in a trench which is about 4 inches deep and about 6 inches wide and flat on the bottom. Now I'm going to sow these seeds roughly an inch apart, scatter them in the bottom of the trench. You don't have to be too particular about this, but get enough beans in, because if you want a good crop, you can't be stingy on planting seeds. Get enough of them in to get plenty of plants. Now, in the springtime, if I were planting these in May, I would cover them about 1 inch deep, because at that time of the year, the soil is apt to be cool and moist. But now in midsummer, the soil is apt to be hot and dry. So we'll cover them, instead of 1 inch deep, make it 2 inches deep. Just like that. Again, I'm going to firm them down, very firm, with the back of my hoe, because if we want seeds to germinate, we have to have a good contact between the seed and the soil around it. All right, we'll go on and finish that row later, but now I want to plant some endive. Endive, as you know, looks much like lettuce, except that it's bitter in taste if it hasn't been blanched. What we'll do eventually with this plant, which looks like lettuce, is to pull up the leaves so that the center part of the plant is shaded. The leaves will lose their green and become cream-colored and very nice to taste in a salad. Endive is peculiar in that it does much better planted in midsummer to harvest in the fall, that is, going from warm days to cool days, than when planted in the spring, going from cool days to warm days. Now, we had a row of endive in here this spring. Everything looked great until we hit a spell of 95 degrees, close to 100 degrees, and within a matter of 2 or 3 days, up came seed spikes. So we just had to pull the plants away. You may have had the same thing happen, but if you plant them now, you don't. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of tricks on planting endive. One, I want the plants to be roughly a foot apart here in the row. There's no need of my sowing seeds all the way along. So I'll just take a pinch of seeds. See, using my planting board, we'll put in 3 or 4 seeds at every foot. Just like that, right on down the row. Put a few of them over there. Now, you might say that I'm ready to cover them, but I'm not going to cover endive seeds. These seeds are light sensitive. All that I'm going to do is simply to press them into the soil like that with my fingers. I just press them down a little bit, and then I'm going to give them a drink of water. And since they're here in the open, where the sun is beating down on them day after day, it's going to be very important that now I have started them and started to water them, I must keep them moist from this time on. The most critical time in any plant's life cycle is just at that, you might say, this moment of birth when the seeds burst through their coats before they have a good root system started. So we must keep those going from good and moist from now on. Now let's go over and we'll do some work on a perennial garden. The first plant I want you to look at is the phlox. You've perhaps heard people say, I grew phlox one time, but they all reverted and they turned into a kind of a muddy purple color. It's not that this original plant reverts, it's that the seeds forming on the top of the plant fall to the ground, germinate, become very strong plants, and they overpower this nice one that's already growing here. So what I want to do now is to remove the seed pods. And all we do is to reach down here. You notice how these stems are branching out so that we're getting some secondary flowering. We'll take some of those off like that. Again, don't worry if you sacrifice a few blossoms, but I do want to get those old seed pods off. You see the new flowers that are coming down in here. Get rid of the seed pods on your phlox if you want them not to so-called revert. Well, let's go from here. I'll show you how to prune roses to get an additional crop of flowers again and again through the year. Now here you see a rose just opening up in the heat of the day, a variety called Peace. And here you see some which have just gone by. The petals are falling off the stem. I don't want this plant to form seed pods. If it does, you might say, says to itself, well, my life mission is accomplished. I'll have progeny coming along. If I remove the seeds and part of the stem, I'll make this plant try all over again and we'll get another crop of blossoms. Well, you might think that you could start right here and simply cut off the blossoms where you have your first leaf. Now this leaf, as you notice, has 3 leaflets on it. If I cut it there, I will get a stem, but I'll get a relatively poor small blossom. Instead, I'm going down here where you see a leaf with 5 leaflets on it, like this. And I'm going to cut about 1/4 of an inch above there. Now, get that out again. This is where we'll get a new stem of flowers coming. Probably we'll get another one from down in here. So we'll have 2 stems in place of 1. Now let's go back and we'll talk about some more flowers. Right here, just coming into bloom, is the Veronica, a lovely dark blue, purplish blue, Veronica subsessilis. And this one will blossom for a month or more here in the garden, along in midsummer when there aren't too many flowers coming. And then next to it we have bee balm. Now you remember having seen this bee balm a couple of weeks ago. It was in full flower and the bees were all over it. Now they're beginning to go by. Again, this is a named variety of bee balm called Adam, dark red. If these seeds were to germinate, I don't know what I would get, but chances are 1,000,000 I wouldn't get something as good as what I have now. So the idea is to go in, take off the old seed pods. It will not only tidy the plant up, but it will get rid of all the chance of starting seeds. You perhaps can hear in the back, there's a pile driver has just started to work. That's good competition. I want to talk about hollyhocks. If you look right up at the top of the hollyhock plant, the last blossoms are beginning to open, but farther down the stem, as you go right down, you see all of these seed pods. Now these hollyhocks are just about ready to cut off at the ground level and get rid of. Now the plants are perennials, they'll live another year. But before cutting them off, I want to tell you a little story. There's a friend of mine always picks hollyhock seeds like this. You see them, those little round things, like little small pennies. She always puts a few of these in an envelope when she sends a letter to a friend. And some of her flowers are growing all throughout the country, a kind of a nice way to spread some of the goodwill of flowers. Let's go for a moment to vegetables. Well, let's look at this particular eggplant. A good-looking fruit. As a matter of fact, if you were to judge an eggplant by the usual criterion, that is the skin still shiny? You'd say, yes, it is still shiny. Therefore, this is a good-sized fruit to pick. But that really isn't a good-sized fruit to pick. This one is not anywhere near as flavorful as this little fellow beside it. And you can see dramatically the difference in the size. In a restaurant, a good chef will pay a premium to get an eggplant which is this size, no bigger than a softball or perhaps smaller. In this large one, the seeds are quite large and tough. In here, the seeds are hardly noticeable. You know, you can always buy these big ones in a store, but you can't get the little ones. This is one of the joys of having them in your own garden. Pick the vegetables when they are at their best. Now let's go up and we'll pick a cucumber, and I'm going to talk about bitter cucumbers. I guess of all the questions I get about cucumbers, it's not how to grow them, but how to keep them from becoming bitter. Well, the first thing that you should do on these cucumbers is to get a variety which in itself is not essentially a bitter variety. And that may be a little more difficult to do than it is to say. But let me say that tests have shown that the so-called burpless type, or the European type cucumbers, that's cucumbers like this one, these cucumbers are always tender no matter what size they get to be. Another variety which is always tender is a Satakoi hybrid. I would also want to say that if you use a lot of fertilizer, a lot of moisture, and have good warm temperatures, then your cucumbers will go on without being bitter. If there is any bitterness in a cucumber, it's apt to be found at the stem end of the fruit. Now, there is no such thing that you can take away the bitterness by peeling it one direction or another direction, or by scoring it with a fork. None of those things work, but really is get the right varieties to begin with and grow them fast. Well, I want to go down and we'll talk about some corn for a minute, because this is the time that we're about to pick the third variety of corn this year, and this is that great one called butter and sugar. Let's peel one of these down and see what we're talking about here. There's the butter and sugar, just as nice a corn as you could possibly imagine. You know, this has sort of been the variety that other plant breeders shoot for. If they can get the quality of butter and sugar, that they know that they have a saleable product. Well, I want to not talk too much about corn, because today I want to talk about delphiniums. You remember, it was just last week in the rain, I went over to the perennial border and I picked some flowers of delphinium. They happen to be a dark blue. These are a light blue, but you can see what they're like. A handsome perennial which will grow for a number of years in the garden. Now, I picked the seeds and made the point at that time that delphiniums will germinate fastest if the seed is very fresh. And so let's review that again. Here are the seed pods, bright green. The older seed pods are beginning to get brown, and it's within those brown ones that you find the seeds. And we peel some of those open here. You can see the seeds coming right out of them. Here are some of the seeds right here. This is the pale blue delphinium. Now, in my seed bed, simply make a little trench about 1/4 of an inch deep. Sow these seeds along in here, not too thickly, because I don't want the plants to compete with one another when they first come out of the ground. Then I'm going to cover them with a potting soil. This happens to be one called Jiffy Mix, which is a combination of finely ground peat moss and vermiculite. Now, this will hold moisture, and this will help to keep the seeds moist. And of course, we'll have to moisten this after we finish planting the row. Well, that will take care of the delphiniums. They'll blossom next year, so it's not too late for you to sow the seeds of your delphiniums for blossoming, not only next year, but for years to come. Well, I get a lot of questions about squashes. How come it is my squash plant produces so many flowers and so little fruit? I've had blossoms for a couple of weeks and no fruit yet. Well, this is the male blossom. This is about noontime. The male blossoms fade about that time of day, but you can see it's a lovely yellow flower. You can tell it's a male flower because the stem beneath the bloom is perfectly straight, just like a little slender pencil. Now, it is peculiar to the squash and the pumpkin to send out a great number of these immature male flowers before the female ones appear. Then the female ones appear and we begin to get fruit. And if you see way down here in the bottom, you see one of the female flowers from yesterday beginning to swell. This is one called Golden Nugget. There's even a little bit of gold in it. But I have another story to tell you about squash, and it has to do with these prickles that are all along the stem, which are really quite stiff and irritating. Now, it seems to me that I can remember as a kid that the Indians I heard that the Indians used to plant squash and pumpkins among their corn plants because these, the squash and pumpkins would stand shade. Well, someone called me the other night, and I've heard from 2 or 3 sources since, that that may not have been the real reason, or at least maybe not the only reason. I have heard it said, and you can't, I'm not swearing this is true, but they say that if you plant this kind of a plant among your corn, the raccoons simply can't stand all of that rough stems, and so they'll stick away from your corn plants. I don't know if it's true. I'm going to try it next year. Maybe you will too. Well, let's go into the greenhouse and we'll talk something about sowing seeds in here. Well, before we get to sowing the seeds, I want to talk about a house plant known as a Dieffenbachia. And here we see an old plant. And if we begin down here at the base of the plant, you'll see that we have a long curving stem, looks something like a, sort of a miniature palm tree from some tropical isle. Up at the top is this great cluster of foliage. Well, now, in a florist shop, they would like a plant which would be cut off about here with a pot there, so the plant would be compact and close to the soil. Now, eventually, on another program, I'm going to show you just how you can do that. We'll make called an air layer at this stem. We'll get roots out of here, pot it up, and have another plant. But this stem down below has promise too. For example, here is a stem of a Dieffenbachia, which I set into this damp sand here a number of months ago, and I want you to see what's happened. Little plants sprout right from the edges here, and we can just take a knife and cut that right off, just like that. Now we have a plant with its roots all attached, ready to grow. We'll set this into some ordinary potting soil like this. And this little plant will be on its own, and it will make a handsome plant. As you can see, its leaves beginning down at the soil surface, and it will grow up eventually as tall as the other one, and we'll have to begin the process all over again. Well, the next thing I want to do is to plant some seeds of an asparagus fern. And I'd like you to look at this asparagus fern. This is one called Asparagus sprengeri, and you see that the seeds are all over here. This is a female plant. The male plant does not bear these seeds. They're green now. They will turn bright red, and eventually they'll turn black. And up here I have some seeds which are black. These are some which I bought. And if you look at them, you'll see what they look like. very much like some BBs. Perfectly brown, black, about 1/8 of an inch in diameter or a little larger. All we do is ordinary potting soil, spread these around on the surface. You just, no fancy tricks here at all. Just put them on the surface, press them in a little bit, and I'm going to cover them with some milled sphagnum moss, which is ground up sphagnum moss. This is sterile. It will help to hold moisture around those seeds. They'll be up and growing in a few weeks, and I'll show you the seedlings as they come along. Now to water this, put it over in a container of water, let the moisture soak up from the bottom. Well, the next plant we want to talk about is the cineraria, and that may not ring a bell with you right away, so let's look at a cineraria blossom. Now this is a wildflower in the Canary Islands, and of course the plantsmen have worked on it to produce all of these daisy-like flowers, which will blossom, by the way, next winter and spring. Well, I'm going to start again with a little pot of ordinary potting soil. In this instance, I'm going to sift the moss on the surface first, because the seeds of the cineraria are extremely tiny. We can't cover them. All we'll do is just sift them on the surface and let them fall down into the crevices. And that's all the covering that it takes to get them. Now these are so fine that you may not even see them come out of the package here, but you see I'm going to simply scatter them as evenly as I can on the surface. I can barely see them land. Now those will be up in a few weeks' time, and we'll follow them and keep transplanting them on and on. We go in there and water this way. Well, we have time, I see, for one question, and it's about strawberries. And this person said, how do I get seeds from my barren Solomeka strawberries? Well, this is the one called Alexandria. It's an alpine strawberry. If you notice, all strawberries bear their seeds on the outside of the fruit, and you simply mash up the fruit, dry it a little bit, and you'll find all those seeds. Plant them, and they'll grow. But you know, I have a much better use for these. That's the way to do it. Well, that's all I have time for today. Next week, we're going to harvest onions, the ones grown from sets. I'm going to plant some winter radishes, entirely different from the red ones. And we're going to plant some rutabagas, something we'll harvest way long in the fall. I'm Jim Crockett in Crockett's Victory Garden. I hope you enjoy the program every week.